Over the weekend, Russian forces launched a massive attack against Ukrainian troops in the northern Lugansk regions. Ukrainian lines are being overwhelmed with accurate Russian artillery and are being overrun from their positions along the Zrebets River. In the last few hours, the towns of Sergivka and Novojegorovka were abandoned by the Ukrainian army, and Russian forces have allegedly taken control of both settlements and are now attempting to force their way into two more small settlements further to the west. On the Zaporozhye front line, Ukraine launched several large tank assaults in the area of Robotny, all appearing to end in failure and what looks like the loss of at least half a dozen Leopard tanks, along with a large number of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and other heavy equipment. Finally, in the Bakhmut area, Ukraine is making progress on the southern Bakhmut flank and has entered the towns of Andriivka and Klishivka. All of this in today's frontline report. After the shaping operations of last week, where the Russian army created two bridgeheads on the Zrebets River, the decision was made to place pressure on the entire Ukrainian Kupiansk defensive line, and the Russian forces managed to achieve their first major breakthrough of the summer campaign. First, we are going to start on the far northern frontier. Reports from several Russian sources claim that the Russian army is actively attempting to storm the town of Senkivka. We have a lot of recent information about battles and potential gains and losses in this forested area. The evidence for Russian progress up here is slim, so I would take any information regarding the fall of Senkivka with a grain of salt. It appears like Ukrainian defenses in the region are strong, and the attack, if it is in fact taking place, is likely meant to redirect Ukrainian reinforcements and artillery away from other areas of the front further to the south. Next, we will go to the town of Rygorodka, where a third Russian river crossing and bridgehead was achieved. But before we get into the details of that, if you like this kind of independent, open source reporting and you would like to support the channel, please consider hitting both the like and subscribe buttons, actions that are totally free for you to do but are a big help for me to grow the channel. Some of my videos are targeted with limited reach, so hitting the bell icon will send you a notification so you do not miss the next update. According to Syriac maps, the Russian army managed to capture the heights across the river and force the Ukrainian army to retreat from the town of Sergivka, or more or less the small farming settlement of Sergivka. Since that information appeared, other sources are confirming that Russian army took control of Sergivka and is now advancing on the settlement of Nadia, where heavy fighting is now taking place. Just slightly to the south, the initial two bridgeheads across the river at Kolyalivka and Karmanzanivka managed to link up and advance deep into Ukrainian-held territory. Allegedly, as of the making of this video, Russian forces have captured the settlement of Novojegorovka and now are attempting to enter Tver Dokhlebove. And I apologize for the pronunciation of that, but it's really weird. The information coming from the battlefield suggests that Russia was able to achieve these breakthroughs via an overwhelming concentration of devastating artillery barrages. Ukrainian troops were taking heavy losses in their trenches and were unable to hold back the Russian advance while under such intense fire. So a retreat was ordered, and Ukrainian forces have struggled to get reorganized and stop the Russian advance since. This next part is pure rumor and possibly just Russian propaganda, and I don't usually speak of these statements when they are reported, but I do think that this is relevant to the situation. Pro-Russian Telegram source Remilin23 recently claimed that a conversation took place between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Valery Zaluzhny, where Zaluzhny asked permission to transfer several reserve brigades to the Lugansk front line due to the desperate situation there and the risk of the collapse of the front line. Obviously, I cannot confirm this conversation actually happened, but based on the rate of Russian gains and the slow speed of the Ukrainian reaction, if reserves do not arrive immediately, Russia could push through to the Oskil River before Ukraine is able to get organized. The next step for Russia in this assault will be to link up the third river, the original river crossings and the third river crossing into one continuous bridgehead, and then try to push west to capture the crossroads at both the towns of Pereshtravineve, Pereshot Travineve, and Proletarsky. Once again, sorry for the pronunciations. At that point, the offensive will have the logistical connections needed to continue. By pointing this out, I am also saying that these two towns will likely be the destinations for Ukrainian reinforcements over the next few days. If the Russian assault is to be stopped, holding these towns will be key to denying the Russians access to a better road network. In several locations, Ukraine is counterattacking the Russian lines to try and relieve pressure from other locations, but from the looks of it, these assaults are unsuccessful. In the Kreminna forests, south of the small settlement of Dubrova, Russian paratroopers managed to expand their control by capturing more of the heavily forested area in a key intersection that supplied the Ukrainian front line. With advances on so many sections of the Lugansk front, it is possible that Russian forces begin to snowball, as Ukraine might struggle at reinforcing so many separate sectors at once. Next, we will move on to the Bakhmut environment, where the Ukrainian army is making some gains. In the fields between Crumple and Yegidny, they have largely been abandoned by Russian forces. Whether this happened over the weekend, or if this territorial change has been happening more gradually over the last several weeks, I'm not entirely sure. It does make the situation less favorable for Russian troops, as Ukrainian forces are gaining a height advantage over the city of Bakhmut. To the south of Bakhmut, Ukraine has managed to capture the trench network on the heights overlooking Klashivka, along with entering several of the streets on the southern leg of the settlement. The heights have bounced back and forth between Russian and Ukrainian control for the better part of a week now, but it appears, at least as of the making of this video, they are in Ukrainian hands. Russia still retains control of some of the positions on the hill, but the momentum appears to be with the Ukrainians on this sector. Even further to the south, there are some claims that Ukraine has entered into the small farming settlement of Andriivka, but as of this moment, I do not have absolute confirmation of that. There are three sections of the south front we are going to go over. The first is on the border of the Zaporozhye and Donetsk oblasts, south of the city of Velika Novosilka. A large Russian counterattack managed to undo much of the Ukrainian gains towards the farming settlement of Pryutny, and the front line has now balanced out along the lakes to the north of the settlement. Next, on the approaches to Guliaipo, a section of the front that hasn't seen much fighting over the last year, an advance was made by the Russian army. The advance took place on the outskirts of Marfapil and managed to take several hedgerows to the west and reached a lake barrier to the north that now sits directly between Russian troops and the Ukrainian-held town of Chervone. I will note that this is an advance that took place last week. I simply just failed to catch the intel, so this is me catching up and keeping the map up to date. Finally, in the area of Robolny, Ukrainian forces launched several attacks on the main Russian line over the weekend, all of which appear to have failed dramatically. Some sources are claiming that marginal progress has been made by the Ukrainians through the minefields now, including Ukrainian President Zelensky, who recently claimed that the Ukrainian offensive was about to pick up steam as his forces were finally breaking through the first Russian defensive line. But footage from the battlefield does not really reflect this. This weekend alone, there were as many as 6 Russian Lancet kamikaze drone strikes on various models of Leopard 2 tanks, resulting in some damaged and some destroyed vehicles. There are also numerous new videos of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles taking hits from Lancet and FPV drones, as well as being targeted by Russian anti-tank teams, Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopters, and there's a number of destroyed Bradleys piled up on the battlefield from other means of destruction. From the looks of it, in this past weekend was one of the worst for the Ukrainian army in months in terms of heavy equipment losses. An overall look at the battlefront suggests the situation is very grim for Ukraine. Heavy losses in vehicles in the south, accompanied with territorial losses in the north, is not a good combination. In order to stop the Russian offensive, Ukraine desperately needs to transfer the equipment that it is actively losing in the south. Moving manpower can be done with speed, but loading, transiting, and unloading heavy equipment from one front to another could take several days, time Ukrainian troops might not have. The recently captured ground in the Bakhmut area is a positive development, but these gains are at risk as the Ukrainian assault formations outside of Bakhmut are the closest to Lugansk, so Ukraine must make a choice to abandon offensive actions in one of their offensive sectors in order to contain the Russians. I will note that throughout the war, Ukraine has been successfully reactive to Russian breakthroughs, so it is possible that Ukraine gains control of their situation and can remain on the offensive, but with the lack of solid gains so far, the utility of that would be questionable. In terms of missile strikes, Ukraine and Russia continue to hit one another in tit-for-tat strikes, with Russia launching cruise missiles and Garand-2 kamikaze drones at the Ukrainian Black Sea ports, and Ukraine launching drone strikes on Russian ammo depots within Crimea. A particularly interesting strike occurred at the Danube port of Remy that sits on the border of Ukraine, Romania, and Moldova. It appears Russia is going after fuel depots at Ukrainian ports that they believe were accumulating fuel for offensive operations, allegedly using the cover of the Black Sea grain deal to ship in the fuel. I obviously cannot confirm if the fuel was actually brought in by sea, but it is certainly the target of ongoing Russian missile strikes. The strike at Remy is particularly notable because of its proximity to the border with Romania, which lies on the opposite side of the river. Romania is a NATO country, so this is the closest Russian strike to NATO borders since the start of the war. Of course, I'm not counting previous missile strikes that landed in Poland, which are believed to have originated from Ukrainian S-300 air defenses. And just a real quick correction, the city is named Reni, not Remy, so my apologies for that. So that is all from me today. Once again, I would like to thank you guys for joining, and until next time.